Okay, this is going to be Fusion to Blender Beginner CAD 01. I've already done these models in Fusion and now I'm going to try to redo them in Blender. So now we have this cube which I drew in Fusion, and now I'm going to give it a go in Blender, and I'm repeating myself. Okay, let's go ahead and minimize this. Okay, we start with your default Blender scene. I'm going to click the cube in object mode. One of the cool things about object mode, if you press the N key, you'll have this widget pop out here, which will give you transform information, location, rotation, scale, all types of stuff. Right now, you'll see that the dimensions are 2 by 2 by 2. This is meters, but you really don't need to worry about the units because STL files themselves are kind of unitless, and especially in Blender, and the units are kind of like a convenience. But if you're doing rendering and lightering and all that stuff like that, that can come into play. But for right now, as these are right now, these are actually going to represent millimeters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and I'm just going to change this directly in object mode. So I'm going to go here and I'm change each one of these to 30. Type 30, 30, 30. Boom. And then I'll go ahead and zoom out a little bit using my middle mouse wheel. And then boom, I'll have my cube here. Now you'll notice here that you see the scale is 15, 15, 15, but I'm not really going to worry about that too much. I'm just going to worry about the size for right now. So anyway, now that I have this cube, and you'll see that I have these three objects in the outliner right here, the camera, the cube, and the light. The light and the camera are both obscured by the large cube that I just created. What I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and export this STL file. So I'm going to select the cube, left click in Blender, go to File, go over here to Export. I'm going to go to STL, and then I'll go ahead and click this to my desktop. And then I already got one right here. I'll just say cube export 01 STL. I'll just go ahead and overwrite it. So I'll export the STL, and boom. Then we have our STL file. I'm just going to go ahead and work with STLs here because while I'm drawing it in Blender, what I really want to approach here is using Blender for 3D printing and things like that. So hopefully as I get into subsequent videos, I'll go into that a little bit more. But just so you can see what's going on here, I'll go ahead and now open up Ultimate Cura, which I like to use as a slicing program. A lot of people have different ideas on slicing programs, but I'll just use Cura for right now because I like the way it looks. Open, go to my desktop, cube export 01.stl, and then I'll do my open right here, and then boom, there goes my cube, and it'll say 30 by 30 millimeters down here. And so then I could go and export it and do all this other stuff and 3D print it if I wanted to like that. All right, now I'm going to go back to Blender. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take advantage of this again, and I'm going to go ahead and move this to the left. Now the thing that we want to keep in mind here is that I like to draw parallels between Blender and Fusion because they both work in kind of this 3D space, and you'll have the X, Y, and Z axes up here. So now I have this thing here in object mode. I'm going to go ahead and move it to I'll move it along the Y axis a little bit. So I'll just go here and I'll just say Y. Let's just go for a -50. Right? So you'll see you have the positive that way and go right there. Now you'll see it right here, and you'll see that the object here it says -50 when I click on it. And then if I go back here and if I say click on the light, you'll see I have the XY positions right here, and then the rotation and the scale is 1. Now I want to keep that scale in your mind because we'll come back and mess with that a little bit later. But we have this in object mode, and we'll go this from here. So also, I keep on talking about object mode and edit mode. When you work with meshes in Blender and a couple of other objects, you have two main modes to work with them. You have object mode, which is basically the amalgamation of all the points, lines, and planes, and you can describe those in whatever way you want to because lines are made up by points, and not planes, excuse me, shapes or faces is what they're called in Blender. But the edges or lines are made up of points, and then the faces are made up of edges or points themselves. So I can go up here and I can click to edit mode, and then what edit mode does is it changes to where you can select the points, faces, or lines of the mesh individually, and you can also switch between selection modes. You can do point, edge, and face up here. You can also use hotkey 1, 2, or 3. Also, oh, excuse me. Also, another thing which you can use is you can do X-ray mode up here, and then there's this button up here. And the cool thing about Blender is it'll highlight. You can press Alt Z, and then that'll let you go through it. And then you can also, I'll just use the hotkey there. Now, the cool thing about X-ray mode is how it lets you select stuff. Because one of the big things you want to keep in mind when you're working with Blender meshes is how you select points. So if I drag a box here and see that, you'll see I'll just select those points on the top there. Now, if I take that away and if I turn on Alt Z and then I select again, maybe this way, you'll see that it also lets me select the ones behind it. One of the big things about working with meshes is how you want to select things. So Alt-Z is a very, very useful tool for that. Also, I'm a big believer in working with Blender with a keypad. So you can press 1 on the keypad, 3, 7, and top to go to your orthographic views, and you'll also notice that the perspective will change a little bit. Up here you'll see top orthographic, but then when I rotate a little bit, you'll see it'll change to you'll see it'll change to perspective, and that'll give you like vanishing points on the lines. And sometimes when you're working with stuff, especially if you want to do your selections, going into orthographic mode with X-ray on will let you make selections like that. Okay. Also, one more thing which I want to highlight about edit mode while we're in here, you'll see that I can, when I bring up this little tab here with the N button, I'll get global and local properties, right? So even though I scaled it up by to 30 units per side, when I look at it in local coordinates, it's still 111 because I looked at it in the local coordinates of because I just scaled it up because the object origin kind of gives its own coordinate system, and then I'm scaling that up to look larger in the world view here. But if I go to global, you'll see where the points are working with it specifically, and kind of manipulating that global and local context is kind of similar to how I try to get people to think about assemblies in programs like Fusions or SolidWorks or other parametric solid modelers. Okay, so now we've got this in edit mode, and the last thing I want to bring to your attention here is that when I go to edit mode, you'll see that I have these points, and as I switch between edge and face mode, I'm basically manipulating these rectangles. We can always do stuff like grab, rotate, and scale, and all these things like that. But you can find another Blender video to talk about that. So now I'm going to tab out. So now what I want to do is I want to actually import that cube that I just created. Right, because one of the reasons I like using Blender for 3D printing is that you can pretty much edit STL files natively. So what I'm going to go here is I'm going to go to File, I'm going to go to Import, I'm going to go to STL, and then I'm going to go to that STL back to my desktop, and I'm going to go back to that cube that I just created, and I'll click Cube Export, Import STL, and then boom, and then you'll see that you'll have Cube and then Cube Export here in the outliner. One of the things that I like to highlight about Blender and all these hotkeys and all these positions is that these screens kind of work in tandem, and also when you use hotkeys, or yeah, hotkeys is the word I'm looking for, their activation depends on where your mouse cursor is. So right now, since my mouse cursor is in the 3D viewport here, I can press N and it's going to pop that out here. But if I go here and I'm pressing N again, nothing happens. Also, if I select an object here in the 3D cursor, you'll see that it's highlighted in the outliner over here. And then also, you'll see that things change over here. And when you look at the object tab, and this is the properties window, you'll see I have location data here, and then I can change that just like I do here. So I changed it -50 here, but if I wanted to kind of put a little bit more on it, I'll say, okay, I'll just make you -60 now. It'll move it, and everything kind of works together. Okay, so now I'm going to select this cube export, and I'm going to go to edit mode for that. And when I go to edit mode for that, what you'll notice with this is now it's made up of triangles. And this highlights an important thing which I like to mention about mesh modeling is that when you create an STL file, really what you're doing is you're taking your solid file and you're turning it into a bunch of polygons. And so what's interesting is that this is the same cube that I exported it out and then brought it back in. But when I brought it back in, everything is as triangles. So if I kick out of that, I'm going to press tab to exit edit mode of this, and I'll go back to this object. You'll see that this one uses quads. And when we go to modeling, we talk about quads versus tris. And one of the things that's interesting is that there's a bunch of different techniques when you're modeling, but one of the things is whether or not you're working with triangles versus whether or not you're working with quads. And with some of the techniques that I'm going to try to go over, at least highlight, it really bears the usefulness of working with quadrilaterals for your modeling. But just remember that when you bring something in, it's going to work with it as triangles. Okay, so now what I also want to do is I want to talk about this scale thing again. So we're already working with the meshes and things like that. So I'm going to click tab to get out of edit mode. So when I select this one, you'll see that this has a scale of 15, but this has a scale of 1. Now remember, these are the same, well, these are not the same. I mean, I guess we exported it and then we brought it back in, but these are similar objects. So just to kind of highlight again, I'm going to select this first cube, press tab to go into edit mode, press 1 to go to vertex select. I'm going to grab some of these points, and then you'll see here with the global and local coordinates, I have -1, 1, 1, and then with the global coordinates, I have 15, 75, and all the other stuff like that. Now, I'm going to press tab to get out of edit mode for this, and then I'll go back to this object. Now, this one has a scale of 1, 1, 1. So if I tab, I do that, and then if I'll go back to my point mode, I'll select one of these vertices here. You'll see that if I have local coordinates, my points are 15, -15, and 15, which makes sense because this is a 30 unit square cube. But if I go to global coordinates, It's the same thing because my origin is here at the center. Okay, now, and this highlights with this is a couple of other things which I'd like to think about. I like to highlight when working with these objects, right? So, the scaling is important because we can use that. Well, it's important for a lot of reasons, really, but even when it goes to like texturing and applying UVs and things like that, it can affect how modifiers will work with your mesh. But another thing which you can do is you can really use the scale and manipulate them to help with your modeling as well. But it's super, super important. But what I want to do here is I want to talk about the importance of applying versus clearing, right? So, and I'll do this in a couple of different, contexts here. So I'll go back to this one. And so with this one, I have a scale of, actually, I'll do it with the location first. So what I'll do here is that I will actually hide this first cube export here, because I'll come back to that in a moment, and I'll just deal with this cube. So with the cube here, right now, my transform position is 60 is 0, -60 in the y, and 0 in the z. So, and then also what I want you to notice is this little orange dot in the center of this, because this is basically the home, the origin location for this mesh. So if I select this, and if I go through the object menu, and if I go to apply, you see we have apply, control A, location, scale, but I'm actually going to clear the location first. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say clear location. So if I clear location, click that, boom, it moves it to 0. So basically, when you clear the location of an object, you're taking its coordinate system and you're making it 0. So you see it was a -60 before, now it's at 0, 0, 0. My original cube is sitting here in the middle of it, and so if I make it visible, they're basically sitting right on top of each other. So I'm going to kick this right now, and I'll just do it -70 this time, just to be a little different. Now, so now I have that. I can bring those cubes back. Oh, turn off the render there. There we go. All right. So now, what I did this time is I cleared the location, right? And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this. I'm going to go to object menu. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the location. So clearing the location took the location and turned it to 0. Applying the location makes the origin point of it, that dot right there, back to my 0, 0 point. So you'll see, even though my cube is listed here, my points here are 0, 0, 0. And really messing with that origin can give you a lot of different things which are useful to do when you're messing with manipulations of your model, right? Okay, so and then I can go and I can also mess with this in a couple different ways, because I can take this and I'll go ahead and grab it. I'll just move it somewhere random over here. All right, cool. And then I'll go back to my object, and then if I clear the location, boom, I'm back to here. Now, another thing that's really nice about this is that we can use this to kind of manipulate things in a couple different ways. So actually what I'd like to do in this case, because right now since my origin is here, it really isn't going to do too much for me. I'd actually like to change my origin to one of these like corner points, right? So what I'll do is I'll go into tab, I'll go into edit mode, and I'll actually select one of these points, and I'll select this one. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say Shift S, and Shift S brings up this radial menu. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say cursor to selected. So I'll click that, and then I'm going to move my 3D cursor. A nice thing about the side menu that pops out when you press the N key in edit mode is that if you go into view, it'll actually give you coordinates for where the 3D cursor is right now, and it's actually that point right there. And so manipulating the 3D cursor is kind of an interesting way to manipulate your object origins. So now I'm going to go back and press tab to get out of edit mode, and now you'll see my origin is sitting right there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to manipulate the origin in a slightly different way. I'm going to go to object, and I'm going to set origin, and I'm going to set origin to 3D cursor. And so when I click that, boom, it's going to move that origin to that point right here. And then if I go back and look at it, my position right here of the location, it goes back to where that object is now. So that's 15, -85, and -15 in my X, Y, and Z. Now if I click this and I go back to my object menu, and then I'll go back to my clear location, I clear location, and then I've moved it back to my point here. So we can use that to manipulate origins and things like that. In subsequent videos, I'll talk about how I can use the clearing and applying of location to kind of move stuff around a little bit. But for right now, I'll just kick to this idea. Now, again, the scale, we've already talked about the scale and how that changes the coordinate system here. So what I can also do is I'll just go here, and then I'll do the same thing. I'll go to object menu, I'll go to, if I clear the scale, boom, it goes back to 0, 0, 0 here. So then what I'll do is I'll just make my dimensions 30 here again. And now since my origin point, I've changed it to that corner, everything is moving relative to that. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is that I'll go back to this Shift C kind of centers your view. I'll just do that. I'll go to object, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear the scale. So now when I clear, well actually before I do that, I'm going to tab, go back here, hit 1 for these points, and you'll see that if I look at it along my local coordinate system, also you got to be careful. And actually this is a, let me just go ahead. There we go. Okay, cool. So click that, there we go. You'll see that it still has the 222 because I'm messing with it in local. But if I do the coordinate settings, you'll have the 30, and you'll see how you get, like, you got to also be careful messing around with this stuff because sometimes you'll get the math. Well, you get 0.000001, and it's stuff like that that can kind of really mess you up with the, when that'll really bite you in the butt sometimes with stuff like this. But since it's just a simple example, I'm not going to worry about it that much. But just something to keep in mind. All right, so I'll go here for the points. I got 0 to all this stuff. Okay, and then I will tab out of this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my object menu and I'll go to apply. This time I'm going to apply the scale. So when I apply the scale, my scale is going to go to 1. So now when I tab back into this and then I look at my local coordinates versus my global, then you'll see that it's giving me my 30. So that's just kind of similar thing with the location. You can do the same thing with rotation, but since I've kind of already talked enough, I'll probably skip out from that. But then pretty much, boom, we have our object. Okay, cool. So just little ways of manipulating that. Want to go ahead and use these kind of ideas to make this one more time. So I'm going to go here and I'll just go ahead and delete this cube. I'll press the X key and delete. And then I still got my, oh yeah, I still have my original export in here for reference. All right, so now what I'm going to do is do Shift C, pull that in there. And then actually, I'm not really going to need these guys right now. So I'll just select these, press X to delete them, because I don't really need the light of the camera right now. Just get them out the way. Boom. So now I just have my hidden cube export in here. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to add. I'm going to add a mesh, and this time I'm going to add a plane, right? So now what I'm going to do is with that plane, I've just added a flat plane, and it's going to be 2 by 2 by 2. I'm going to go into edit mode again. I'm going to select this edge right here. I'm going to do Shift S. I'm going to do cursor to selected. Boom. All right, I'm going to tab out. Then I'm going to go back to object, set origin to 3D cursor, set my origin to my 3D cursor. You'll see that little dot goes in there. I'm still in object mode, and then I'm just going to go to, I believe it's Control A is apply. No, I want to clear. And so I'll do Alt G. So if I go here, object, clear, Alt G is to clear location. So I'll press Alt G, clear my location. I'll go right there, and I'm doing that just to put the origin at the corner. All right. So now one of the reasons I wanted to move that origin here is because I want to go ahead and scale this out, right? So I'll shift to C here. So now what I can do is I did this before by just selecting the points specifically. So what I'm going to do here is that since I want this to be 30, because what I'm going to I keep on saying what I'm going to do here, I'm going to scale this up to 30 units by 30 units, and then I'm actually going to extrude it to create the solid object, because you can extrude objects in Blender. So what I'll do this time is rather than messing with it directly in the pop out over here, I'll just press the S key. And then as you've seen other Blender tutorials, you can do the S. And since this is flat, I really don't have to worry about it, but remember you can press X to lock it to a direction, Y. Now Z is not going to work since this is a flat object, but and I can also do Shift Z, which is lock it. It's going to be the same thing. All right, so I'll just sit here now, scale it by 1.5. I'll press 1.5, and then I'll click it there. Now, one of the things that's interesting here is that I'm running into that same scale issue. Now, I could just apply the scale, but actually, I want to do something different here because I'm doing this in object mode. So I'm actually going to Control Z to undo this. And now what I'm going to do is, Shift C again to kind of zoom on it. This time is I'm going to press Tab and I'm going to go into edit mode. All right. And then I'll just select all these points. And then what I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to scale and then I'm going to press by 15. All right. Now, spoof. Back up. Screw that up. Let's zoom out a little bit. All right, there we go. So I'll scale, and then I'll scale by 15, right? Now, what's interesting here is it's going to scale around the center, but what I find really, really interesting is that you can have different objects that you can set your transform around. So if you go to this point right here, you'll say transform pivot point, And there is a hotkey for this, which I forget. Is it the, no, it's not the dot. Is it the period? Yeah, it's the period. There we go. I found it. Yeah, so it's the same thing here. You can set the pivot point. So I'll just do it here for right now, though. But you'll see that you can do active element, you can do medium point, bounding, box cursor, all these different ones here. And this will really come into play when you're trying to manipulate different things. So if I have it set for the medium point and I set scale, it's going to scale around the center because that's the median of these 3 points. So if I grab these 2 points, I try to scale those two, the median point is going to be from here. Setting your transforming pivot point and being knowledgeable about it is a very, very cool thing to do when you're trying to manipulate and model things. So now if I go here and if I say to active element, I'll say, and I'll scale from this, right? Scale from that. So we can play these with these around and get from here. And then so what I'll do here is I'll see, let's try bounding box cursor, right? All right, so all right, we do different stuff. What I want to do is I can also pick the 3D cursor as a reference. So if I scale from that, I can scale from the 3D cursor, right? So this is why, again, I like to kind of snap the 3D cursor, because you can do the different ones and you can manipulate them in different ways, but really a lot of times I just like to use the active element, medium point, or the 3D cursor. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for all these. I'm going to say scale. I'm going to type 1.5. There we go, because I want to bring it up to 30. There we go. So now when I have that, then this point here should be 30, 30, 30. There we go. Now when I tab up, you'll notice my scale is still at 1, right? So because I went into edit mode and manipulated my points in there, my overall scale of it kind of changed because I kind of think of edit mode as having its own kind of like local coordinate system. And so again, just the manipulating, you can do it different ways. You can manipulate it in object mode and then apply the scale, or you can go into edit mode and make your changes. So just wanted to kind of build some awareness of that, and hopefully I'll be able to reinforce that in subsequent videos. Okay, so now that I have this, what I'd like to do is I'm going to go into edit mode again, and I'm going to go into face select mode. All right, and then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to extrude this face. Now there's a tool for it over here, but I'm just going to press the E key. So I'm going to press E, and then it's going to normally default to just the normal direction for it, and then I'll just type 30, 30. Okay, so then I'll press 30. We'll do that, and then I'll tab out, and then I'll have my cube again. Okay, so there's a lot more that I could go into with this, but I feel like this has been a decent amount of talking before. And also, since this was kind of a simple object, I wanted to kind of go ahead and just use it to express a couple of more ideas about just working with Blender and meshes. I'll go on to part 2, and I'll use that to talk even more about things that I find useful. Hopefully this was helpful, and stay tuned for the next one. Thank you for your time.